Love Where You Live is brought to you by Live Love Local Michigan, the online and print magazine celebrating Michigan through amazing adventures, stunning photography, high-profile content, and more. Subscribe to our monthly print magazine for exclusive content you won't find on our free online magazine. With your subscription, you also receive automatic entry into our monthly subscriber Spend Local Michigan and surprise pop-up giveaways with prizes so magical, you'll think you found a pot of gold at the end of a Michigan rainbow. Subscribe online at livelovelocalmi.com. Hey, Michigan. Welcome to the very first episode of Love Where You Live. I am your host, Tamara Graham. Hold on to your hats because in this inaugural podcast, we are plunging headlong into the wild world of politics. It's that touchy subject we can't help but love to talk about. Who said we're afraid of a little political disorder? Today, we dive into the world of Ottawa County and the minds of people behind the ultra-conservative organization Ottawa Impact. As some of you may be aware, Ottawa County's Board of County Commissioners, with the backing of Ottawa Impact, recently took it upon themselves to hijack democracy with a vote that designated Ottawa County as a quote-unquote constitutional county. Now, I'd like to be able to say that it's a democracy hijacking the likes we've never seen before, but then I'd have to pretend that the past 7 years didn't happen. I'm joined in this conversation today by three guests: Taran Damalcheruvu, who's a brand new Gen Z voter; Dan Martin, who is a resident of Ottawa County and also happens to be an attorney and constitutional scholar; and Lynne Smelser, a freelance journalist who has been working on this story for Live Love Local Michigan. In this podcast, we define what a constitutional county is, if it's even legal, and we unpack what this means for the residents of Ottawa County and Michigan moving forward. So, Lynne, I would like to start out with you. You've been working on this story for a while. Give us some background as to what you know and what you've learned about Ottawa County and what has kind of led us down the road to get to where we are today.
All right. Dan can probably give you a lot more of the specifics and step by step. But basically, a couple of months ago, I was contacted by an Ottawa County resident who said that there were some alarming things beginning to go on. There were people who were campaigning for the county offices who had some rather extreme views, and the person who was calling me, we'll call her Anne, was alarmed at what was going on, and she herself was involved in the county government, the previous county government, as a Democrat. So when things started going on, she called me and said there was going to be an election that could really turn things around. And this was last fall. And of course, we know what happened from there. A new board was brought on, county commissioners. And in January, they took office. And right out of the gate, they began changing things. And they changed the county motto. They removed several people from offices. They closed the diversity office, and they began rearranging a lot of things. And the disturbing part of their initial actions were the momentum that they had and their belief that this is God's will, that they have a mandate from God. And so it's okay to do what they were doing because they're doing it for God. And some of their big points include parental rights, which before we began, we were kind of talking here tonight about parental rights and how it involves the Constitution. Not really, but they're waving a lot of emotional phrases around. Meanwhile, they're doing things like turning away money that could go to the county to help various offices. They're closing down diversity, things that would work to provide more equality. And they are also making it difficult for people to use the Freedom of Information Act. My source, Anne, said that she tried to obtain some information under the Freedom of Information Act and was told that it would cost her $40,000 to get this information. And she said the other people have tried to get information and have just been stonewalled. They've been told the information doesn't exist, or they simply aren't getting any responses. And this is continuing to develop. Yesterday, as we know, they voted to become a constitutional county, despite the fact that their meeting went until well after midnight, and most of the speakers were opposed to it.
I read that it was like 102 people spoke that were opposed to it, and they voted 9-1 anyway, with one absent, to become a constitutional county.
Yeah, exactly. And they did this claiming that they were doing the will of the county. But the fact that they had 102 people all saying it was not what they wanted for the county is disturbing and very scary. And this is really just the beginning. They have bigger plans moving forward, and things have taken a very well, it's already a negative turn. What was I about to say? Anne has told me that she has received death threats, that other people who are Democrats have received death threats. People have had swastikas painted on their doors, and there's a lot of intimidation that is going on. So in my research, I've been researching this for a couple of weeks now, and I took the time to talk to someone who was inside of all of this. And I said, I'd like to hear what is your side in this. I'm hearing what Anne is saying. What are you saying? And she doesn't. This other anonymous source does not speak for the party. She said does not speak for the Republicans. However, she is very close to the inner circle. And she said that, quite frankly, they are liberating Ottawa County, that they are restoring rights and dignity for the residents of Ottawa County, and that the far right Republicans are the ones who are being misunderstood. All they want is to help everybody.
Help everybody by oppressing everyone, removing rights, bringing God into the mix. No separation of church and state no longer exists in Ottawa County.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I get the idea. In fact, they have blatantly said this to me, that they're following God's mandate. So the things they are doing are reasonable and acceptable because they're doing it for God.
So much freedom there. Dan, can you explain to us what a constitutional county means?
Sort of. And the reason I say sort of is when you take an oath of office in Michigan, pretty much at any level, for being a member of a public body such as county commissioners, school board, city, township government, you swear an oath to the Constitution that you're going to uphold the Constitution of the state of Michigan, the United States of America. So, to one extent, the idea of having a constitutional county is superfluous because all of those individuals have already taken an oath. But the concept behind why some counties are doing this is to, in large part, address red flag laws, such as the law that Governor Whitmer just signed, dealing with access to guns and weapons. Where the red flag law, if somebody has a mental illness, there might be a red flag which might either preclude or delay them in obtaining a weapon. And there are concerns that that may violate somebody's Second Amendment rights. Won't go into that. But the constitutional county is basically saying, hey, we are going to ignore any laws that we believe violate constitutional rights, such as the Second Amendment. And so
They get to choose what they feel.
what
What
they
they're essentially
believe.
saying is they get to choose what they believe is our constitutional right, not explicitly what is a constitutional right. They're taking it upon themselves to, what's the term I'm looking for? Oh my gosh.
Be judge and jury, maybe. Um,
Basically, yeah.
yeah. So from their perspective, if they or the county sheriff believes that a law does not comply with their interpretation of the Constitution, it won't be enforced. Again, talking about something being superfluous. Local sheriffs, police officers, local prosecutors always have prosecutorial discretion about what laws they enforce. The best example I can give you is if you've ever been pulled over by a police officer for speeding and not been given a ticket. There's some discretion there. They don't enforce every violation of the law. That's always been there. It's not necessary to have a resolution saying we're going to be a constitutional county to enforce the Constitution because they've already taken an oath. The local units of government are, in a sense, subordinate to the constitutional rights of all people. So, local units of government, just as state government, just as the federal government, cannot violate people's constitutional rights. Normally, we believe that the United States Supreme Court would be the supreme authority in interpreting and deciding what the Constitution means. They're trying to take a route that says, no, they're going to decide what the United States Constitution means, and they won't enforce laws that they believe might violate the Constitution, even if they've been democratically, and I say that with a small d, their representatives in Lansing have voted for these laws signed by the governor. They followed the democratic process, representative democracy, our republic, which we are, following that process. If they believe that the law is unconstitutional, rather than in a sense challenge it in court, they're just not going to enforce it.
So then they're going to be blatantly in violation of several people's constitutional rights. I think they already are by what they've already started to do by removing people from office, by getting rid of the equity and diversity
Yeah, and what
organization.
becomes weird is when we start playing with words, if you will, because I don't understand why anybody would be against diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are three words that I think most rational people would say are good ideas in a representative democracy. That we want to allow for diversity, we want to allow for equity, and we want to allow for inclusion. They think of it as basically a form of reverse racism, I believe. And so they're thinking that the left is choosing these words, and similarly they're choosing this idea of a constitutional county, which who can be against the county following the Constitution. But again, it's superfluous. It's not necessary, and it's not really what they mean. What they mean is they're going to be, in a sense, picking and choosing what laws from the state level and federal level to enforce. These individuals ran and got elected because they were politically savvy. I'll be honest. They followed our system and they show how our system is broken. Ottawa County is a conservative county to begin with and has been. It's one of the most conservative counties in all the United States of America. It is a beautiful county, not just because of the people, many of whom are great people. So even though it's conservative, what happened is they realized that some of the county commissioners, who in large part were all old white men, with the exception of Frank Garcia, even no offense to Doug Zylstra, who's the Democrat, lone Democrat on the county commission, he's an old white man too. So I apologize for that if any of them are listening. They realized that they would be able to primary these people. Only 30% of Ottawa County turned out for the primary. And because Ottawa County is such a Republican primary, if they could get the majority of the 30% who turned out, which is obviously less than 50% of the county, once they got through the primary, they were as good as gold. and they couldn't unseat the Democrat from Holland, Doug Zylstra, and they were not able to unseat Roger Bergman, who was absent last night and didn't vote for the resolution in the city of Grand Haven. Otherwise, they pretty much cleaned house, including a number of people I know fairly well from my work as an attorney here in Ottawa County. And they immediately got rid of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office. And they got rid of the county administrator. And they hired their pick for the county administrator. And again, talking politics, and frankly, it's almost like a brilliant move, because what they did is they got rid of one county administrator, and then they hired an African American to be the new county administrator. So politically, they argue, how can you say that we're against diversity when we've just hired an African American as our county administrator?
Oh my gosh, the gaslighting.
It is a weird time to live here, I will say. It hurts in many ways our reputation. Some of the big employers have spoken out against what's been going on because they want to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, because they want to be Fortune 500 companies and they're competing in the global marketplace with others, and they don't want to return to the dark ages. I mean, I think I may have told you before, one of my biggest concerns of moving here was a lack of diversity, but it's hard to beat Lake Michigan, especially in the summertime. And there are wonderful people here. And I think what you've seen is a reaction to the way the county was moving. Because as I mentioned, it's always been historically conservative and it was remaining conservative. But we had a county office of diversity, equity, inclusion. Our county motto, which was changed, was "Where you belong." It was changed from "Where you belong" to I'm trying to remember, something like
Let freedom ring or
ring. Yeah,
something.
let freedom ring.
Are you serious?
Yes. Um, it becomes sort of like who belongs, whose freedom, those types of things. They
It seems to me they have appointed themselves kings and rulers of Ottawa County. Like everything that is going to be decided, how it is ran, the laws that will be enforced, what the sheriff does, what the county administrator does, how the money is spent is all going to be decided from them. And they don't even care what their constituents are saying or
Well,
what their
they
constituents
think they're
feel.
saving. They think they're saving the constituents. They think they're saving Ottawa County.
That's not freedom. That's not democracy. Freedom and democracy isn't you saving people and forcing people to live by your ideology. And what they're doing, and they're blatantly saying it's God's will, that is unconstitutional at its core.
Yeah, it kind of is. Can I for a second go back to something that Dan said a few minutes ago about only 30% showing up to vote? One of the really big lessons here for all of us is to take every election seriously, because there's this tendency for us to say, well, of course I'll do the presidential election, but who cares about the county commissioner? Who cares about the smaller offices? And that is something that I really hope Americans wake up to, that we all have to vote in every election.
Starts locally.
Yeah, it starts locally.
And it's so true. It really does start locally, and then it goes up to the federal, because just look at the environment that we have in this country right now, where at the state level, the laws that are being passed at the state level, they're basically creating, some states are creating mini dictatorships, quite honestly, what they're doing at the state level completely. And they at the state level are completely ignoring the Constitution at the level of governor. And we are seeing it at the county level at the moment in Michigan. And it's important to note that Ottawa County is the second county that has done this. The first one was Livingston County on April 24th, which I just learned about today. I had no idea that happened either. So we have two counties in Michigan. And as Lynn mentioned, they have a plan to spread this throughout the state.
Yeah, there's an organization called Michigan Impact, and they are mapping out how they can duplicate what's going on in Ottawa County in other counties. That's their goal.
Well, I was just going to say, Ottawa Impact which is the organization that has sort of taken over Ottawa County's government. They've got a position statement, and I thought you guys might get just a slight kick out of this. One, it talks about American values, respecting and preserving religious freedom and values dear to our communities. We defend innocent life, including preborn babies, nuclear family, and our nation's Judeo Christian heritage.
We don't
So,
have a Judeo-Christian
correct.
heritage.
Correct. There's like a misunderstanding of what was going on at our founding. I was watching a video of I think it was Bill O'Reilly, sort of interviewing or interrogating a guy who wrote a book about the myth of Christian nationalism. And Bill O'Reilly was, trying to get him to acknowledge that the Constitution was based upon God and the Constitution was based upon the Declaration of Independence, kind of ignoring the fact that we've talked about before that there was a 10-year period between the Declaration of Independence in 1776 and the Constitution in 1787, where we had Articles of Confederation. That they didn't flow one right after the other. Um, then it talks about First Amendment. It talks about the protecting free speech in the public arena. We reject political correctness, cancel culture, recognizing tyranny reigns in the absence of truth, free thought, and accountability for corruption.
So they're
As
basically saying that what they're fighting for is to be able to lie and not be held accountable for lying and spreading misinformation and disinformation.
yeah,
That is essentially what they're fighting for. With the First
they're-
Amendment, they're dragging the First Amendment through the mud.
yeah, it's weird when you see individuals who are running, in a sense, on a platform of openness and transparency in government. And before they take the oath of office, I mean, Attorney General Dana Nessel already reviewed this and basically said what they did technically didn't violate the letter of the Open Meetings Act, but it violated the spirit because they essentially conspired before taking the oath of office to fire the attorney, to fire the administrator, to eliminate the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, to hire John Gibbs, to hire a new law firm. All of these things, which they did outside of open meetings and just rammed through in their first meeting. They had not yet taken the oath of office, so they were not yet members of a public body, so the Open Meetings Act didn't apply to them.
But
And,
here's an interesting, oh, I'm sorry, Dan, if I can interrupt
yeah,
really quickly. Anne said to me today that they continue to violate the Open Meetings Act because they all go to the same church, they all circulate in the same circles. And she said they come into meetings and you feel like you've just tuned into the middle of a TV show when the meeting starts, because how do you prevent them when they're together all the time from talking about these things?
I'm not okay with this. I'm not okay with this at any level.
try living in the middle of it.
So what are the consequences of this? So like, how can this be stopped? How can this be legal? How can it be legal?
What they did follow their process in Michigan with essentially a two-party system in the primaries. And so they followed that process to get elected. It's showing us in part what is a problem with our process, whether it's a two-party system, the primaries, etc. The fact that during the primary only 30% of the people turn out to vote because nothing really is important for them. They realize Republicans are going to win the general election. It's a problem when we want to have a representative democracy and only 30% of the people are turning out to vote.
Right. I agree there. That is a huge problem. That's a huge problem at a national level.
Correct. Now, the reality is there are laws such as the Open Meetings Act, the Freedom of Information Act, that require transparency in government. If they're not following those laws, the letter of those laws, they can be charged criminally as well as civilly for violating them. There was the mention earlier of potential FOIA fees in the amount of $40,000. I've worked with local units of government for 25 years, and I've had some fairly high estimated fees. I've never had a 5-figure estimated fee in 25 years. So not
That's
even
obscene.
$10,000. It
That
is.
is obscene.
I think the highest I've ever seen is right around $4,000, $4,500 in terms of estimated fees.
That's even obscene.
It is. Yeah. And then usually people will scale back their request. Again, working with local units of government, a lot of times people will do sort of fishing expeditions where they don't really know what public record they're looking for. So they ask for all kinds of things, like every email pertaining to a particular subject with no time frame. And so whether it's a school board, township board, they're looking through their emails between all employees, all board members, trying to find something that might fit those parameters. And so the time involved in doing that runs up an estimated fee higher. And then if you would rather scale back your request, you can do so, and we might be able to find that. The reason we have an Open Meetings Act and the reason we have a Freedom of Information Act is because of the outcome of Watergate. These were enacted because of tyranny, corruption at the highest levels.
Yeah.
And Tip O'Neill said all politics are local. We want to make sure that we don't have that corruption even at the local level.
And here we have it. And here we are living it in 2023. I'm almost speechless, quite honestly. And that's saying a lot
That is
coming
rare.
from me. Coming from me, I cannot tell you how angry this makes me and how loud we need to be to stop this from spreading throughout the state of Michigan. This is unconscionable. This is not freedom. This is not democracy. They are not saving us from ourselves. We do not need to be saved from ourselves. They are doing the exact opposite of what they are claiming they are doing. They are oppressing.
And here's the key thing, the language that they use. My PhD is actually in rhetoric, and this is a beautiful example, or scary example, rather, not so much beautiful, but the way it's being framed, that they're protecting people, that they're actually looking out for people, that the way it was before was harming people. They have some interesting phrasing that you can't really, on the surface, argue with. But it's when you start getting farther down and say, when they say we want everybody to feel welcomed here, despite the fact that we don't want our motto to be, where everyone belongs, but we want everyone to feel safe here. And so we're taking these steps so that people feel safe here, while they're excluding groups and they're making people feel unsafe. It's the rhetoric.
Well, and the point of laws surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're laws for a reason. They're laws because we excluded diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout the history of this country. And so these laws had to be passed in order to create some sort of equality with Americans who are not white. And so removing this it's doing the exact opposite of including everyone. You are literally saying this county is for white people and you don't belong here unless we say you do, is essentially what they're saying. That is my interpretation of it. Anyone else?
I was going to say, I think that's the message that a lot of people are receiving.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're creating their message. And from my perspective, and all the people I've spoken to, it seems like they're creating it from their own sense of fear. We don't want things to change. We don't want things to be different. We don't want to have to deal with people who are different from us.
That is so key. That is a key point that you're saying. They don't want their lives disrupted. They want to be comfortable, and they don't care who else is uncomfortable with their comfort, basically. And it's not about freedom. It's not about democracy. It's about, this is what we want. We want what the history of this country has been, and we're uncomfortable with it being anything else. We're afraid of pronouns. We're afraid of people who are not white coming and living in our county, unless we say it is okay for them to come and live in our county. I just cannot. It's unconscionable to me, honestly.
This is the part where I actually really wanted to speak on, because, Lynne and Dan have decades more experience in their fields than I do. Dan's a lawyer and Lynne's a journalist. So what I have really put my effort into really learning is socioeconomics. That's my main field of study. It's what I really enjoy learning about. And I truly believe almost everything that happens in the world can be related back to socioeconomics as a way of sort of studying how these things have come to be. And the study of socioeconomics, in this sense, in a political science sense, is a field of historical study known as dialectical materialism, which is how resources have been distributed across history to create the reality we live in today. And traditionally, these are, hard resources: money, land, individual wealth, and how it is accumulated and how it has affected demographics of a community. But I think an often overlooked form, or an often overlooked currency in dialectical materialism, is the concept of social capital, which is how much power a given group has in a community. When we look at Ottawa County, or Livingston, which is another county that has enacted this constitutional county sort of edict, you look at freedom like a currency, right? At equity, when you have equitable freedom all across the board, people are equal. There is no hunger, and there is no hunger, or there is no destitution. And conversely, at the top end, there is no absolute extravagance of wealth. There are no yachts. There is no super planes. In our current system, and the system that the people in control of Ottawa County sort of subscribe to, is the absolute rule of the individual. The individual is held above all, and as a result, there's no community. So in a system where individualism is prioritized, there is no hard cap on the social capital they can accrue. That is why you see sort of the reddest parts of our nations be the wealthiest, because people with high amounts of social capital have accrued vast amounts of material wealth, and they can in turn use that material wealth to insulate their social capital. Social capital is sort of the one that makes material wealth possible. And when these communities, as we have been building them to be over the past 200 years of this country's history, we have constructed these communities to be able to subsist and survive and continue to manufacture their development through siphoning off of actual material wealth and social wealth off of the communities around them. Their main priority within a capitalistic society is to maintain their position of power, both socially and economically. And what we see now with the constitutional county concept is sort of a systemic effect of that. They're enacting what they have sort of believed over the past. They're reacting to challenge, is what I'm trying to say.
That is true. That is exactly how.
Two people like this in Ottawa County, which is, I assume, the ethnic makeup of Ottawa County is very white and very wealthy. When you introduce concepts like diversity, equity, and inclusion, that reduces their social capital, right? Because they're no longer, if they are the only people there, they tend to have a dominant position in the community. When you bring in minorities, ethnic minorities, sexual minorities, when you try to do economic-based planning for the community to ensure poor communities are brought up, this is very prevalent in California. The NIMBYs, not my backyards, who express liberal values politically, but are often very aggressively against affordable housing and actual economic wealth shift. When you introduce these concepts to these communities, they go on the defensive. And a way they do this is by sort of employing this optical grift that's very, very prevalent amongst conservatives. It's sort of the veneer of populism. It's very much what Donald Trump used in his presidency. It's very much what a lot of current prominent conservative politicians use to retain the support or maintain the support of sort of not very wealthy people.
The middle class to the lower middle class, socioeconomic.
The middle to lower middle class.
Yeah.
They use this laser focus on very niche issues, sort of like gun control, like gay people, trans people, CRT, things like these buzzword talking points. They hyper focus on these tiny, insignificant issues in the grand scheme of things that have very little effect on how people live their day-to-day lives, and they blow it up to massive proportions because and they employ this very simple understanding of the problem.
Is that going on a lot in Ottawa County, Dan? Where are they using the language like CRT and trans issues with all of this?
So again, first at the county level, absolutely yes, in terms of wanting to eliminate the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. While at the county level, you're seeing that simultaneously, you're seeing similar things going on at school board levels. In particular, dealing with critical race theory, dealing with the LGBTQT, dealing with books, all of those things. If you do a search not just for Ottawa County or Ottawa Impact, but if you look at school boards such as Hudsonville, which is in Ottawa County, Jenison, which is in Ottawa County, Grand Haven has been going through it, West Ottawa. There are these fights over books in the library, concerns about pornography, sexuality, teaching sex education to students, all of these different types of things at the local level at the school boards. Jamestown Township, which is in Ottawa County, had a library that the voters rejected its millage. It's going to be closing down in a year because the voters rejected its millage on a couple different occasions because of books. And so now the library isn't going to have funding, so nobody can get any books because they refuse to take like half a dozen books off of the shelves. And so yeah, there is again in my mind a misunderstanding. Critical race theory is like a lens to kind of see certain things. I don't, and it's taught in law school, basically. I don't know that it's being taught elsewhere. It's trying to understand the way the laws sometimes work, socioeconomic impact. There are a lot of lenses that we can see the world through because none of us are omnipotent. To use a theological term, none of us are God. We're not omnipotent. We can't see what certain people think we should be able to see, and so we have to see the world through our own senses. There are things that will help us, like a socioeconomic understanding, economic, historical, critical race theory, feminist theory, lots of ways to understand other people's experiences, because until we walk a mile in their shoes, we don't know what their experiences are like. And it's not possible for any of us on this call, really, to be an African American in the United States of America and to know what that's
We'll
like.
never know what that's like.
And I will
But
never.
we can learn through the population of what their experiences are and listen to them and believe them.
Correct. To hear their stories. I know one of my clients was trying to recruit an African American woman to come work in Ottawa County. This might have been 2 or 3 years ago. And she said, no way. I mean, it was before where we're at now, but just citing the lack of diversity and not feeling safe in Ottawa County. I can tell you I do feel safe. One of the things that T said was, talking about the wealth of Ottawa County. There's also poverty in Ottawa County. We do have rural poor. We do have some urban poor. There is some diversity in socioeconomic status. But because Ottawa County has a lot of Lake Michigan frontage on the Grand River, Spring Lake, Lake Makatawa, there are a lot of wealthy people who live in Ottawa County. And I know historically a lot of wealthy people argue against entitlements of poor liberal people. But from what I do, you've never really seen anybody entitled until you see the ultra wealthy, because they're not used to having a local unit of government tell them no, they can't put up a large accessory building. They're not used to hearing the word no.
Yeah, and to that, I tried to say this earlier, but I think I phrased it kind of poorly. When I said that social capital is sort of like a resource, I meant it in the sense that it's finite, right? There's a finite amount of freedom a given community can experience. At one extreme end, you have what I would say is the current reality of the world. Over the past few hundred years, given the inherent inequity of our system and just the way humans would take the path of least resistance, we have allowed freedom as a currency to concentrate into the hands of a few. And I believe Ottawa County is an extreme case study of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have urban poor and you have the economically destitute there, but they're a small minority and they were marginalized, brushed to the side, given very little given very minimal representation or any sort of thought when it comes to main decisions that could affect their lives or perhaps even improve them. At the extreme end, you have that. And at the other hand, you have total equity. So because freedom is finite, there's a lower end of equity in terms of how free people can be. And this is very difficult to phrase.
And I don't know if this is in a sense where you're going, but it's like, if I cannot discriminate against somebody based on their religion, based on their gender status, based on their race, national origin, if I can't discriminate against them, you're taking away my freedom.
Exactly. That is exactly what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
What at the extreme end of freedom is the extreme freedom of an individual. It is a complete freedom from consequence from the community. It's a freedom from consequence. It's a freedom from accountability. That is the extreme end of when you allow social capital to accrue in the hands of an ultra minority of extremely wealthy people. They are completely free from any sort of accountability whatsoever. And when you begin to take that away, when you move towards the collective idea of freedom, which is a freedom to belong in a community, freedom to do things, freedom to a poor person is incredibly different from freedom to an extremely wealthy person. Extremely wealthy person, freedom is taking a trip to Europe or the Bahamas or on their private yacht. Freedom to a poor person is the freedom to not worry about having to eat tomorrow. Freedom to not worry about having a
roof over your head.
That is true freedom to them. And
I dealt with the situation on a zoning issue where I was talking with the property manager of an ultra wealthy property owner in Ottawa County. We were talking about zoning of their property here in Ottawa County, and the property manager said to me, this was a couple of years back, I'm really sorry, Dan, I'm having a hard time focusing on this because we're worried about the hurricane down in the Caribbean taking out the power to our island. Like they own their own Caribbean island. And that's the kind of wealth that is in Ottawa County.
And it is poverty that is the cost of these people's extreme excesses of freedom. If they did not have that, the cost of that island could feed the poor people in Ottawa County for centuries, probably could house them for centuries. And that is what I was trying, that this sort of long tangent is getting around to, is it is this extreme concentration of social capital and wealth. It accrues a lack of freedom elsewhere, and that lack of freedom is for the majority of Americans who live in poor,
which is the majority of people
who live in poverty. Which is it's not the majority of Americans, but it is a growing number of Americans.
Well, I think middle class can even be included in that because we don't have anywhere near that kind of wealth. Mm-hmm. So, if you compare the wealth that they have, even to the average middle class person in the United States, it's.
And when in the context of Ottawa County, it is a recognition and defense of that fact. They think it's a good thing. The thing about conservative, wealthy Americans is that they have been raised in a sense of ownership of the country, of their communities, of their general station in life. You see it a lot in their messaging. And Lynn alluded to this earlier with her discussion of rhetoric. If you read the underlines of what they say, this is a community that should be for the people, but they leave out which people.
Which
right?
people?
It's not. They don't explicitly say for everyone. Us. It's a community for them. Yeah, you have to look at their actions that pair with it, and this is a lot what I mean when I talk about the conservative optical grift. They use language couched in collectivism and populism. They use inherently leftist rhetoric a lot of the time to mask very exclusionary, very reductive, very antithetical policies to the principles that they preach.
So that language issue has gone back to the founding of our country too. I mean, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. But what we mean are all men who are
landowning,
white property owners.
Yeah. Right.
It feels good to say, right? You feel, and that's the conservative life, is feeling. They enjoy, a lot of conservatives enjoy the line, facts don't care about your feelings. But in reality, if you look at the policies that they enact and the way they organize their communities, a lot of the time they make reactionary, and this is where the definition of reactionary politics comes from, reactionary decisions. They react on their fear their fear of persecution, their
Fear of everything.
Fear of everything, yeah.
There's a great album from the late 80s, maybe early 90s by Public Enemy called Fear of a Black Planet. And that is in large part, I think, what you're seeing happening right now is some of that fear, because we know demographically the United States is about to become a no majority racial country.
Right.
And
whites will not be
We will
in the
not be the
majority.
majority.
And that is a terrifying thought to the people who have spent generations accruing wealth and social capital. Because, as I said, it's a finite resource. And when you bring more people into the equation, that massive pile of gold diminishes because it's got to be shared between more and more people. And suddenly, you know, that island, the Bahamas, you know, it's a few million too expensive. And that's a terrifying thought for them because they have been raised with the entitlement to their station. They genuinely fully believe, subconsciously, right? Consciously, they'll say that they're very progressive, that they love gay people, they have gay friends, right? They'll consciously say these things, but it's in their subconscious. It's in their, you know, conditioning, socioeconomic conditioning to hold on for dear life and protect their investments.
And there you have it. Honestly, best argument I've heard.
So ultimately, it comes back to they claim they're giving freedom, but what they're doing is shoring up their own freedom
Yes.
at the expense of others.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone else, literally everyone else, because they are a small minority.
Going back to that specifically with Ottawa Impact, like one of the things they talk about in their position statement, if we will protect parental rights and personal freedoms above perceived health measures promised to the common good.
I'm sorry,
So
what?
they started off
healthcare
really as a reaction to the masks in large part.
So
The
how is
loss.
that not for the common good?
All right.
Correct. So it's the perceived health measure promised for the common good. So in other words, my individual freedom, as T's kind of saying, individual trumps the collective.
Yeah, but your
I
individual.
probably shouldn't use the word Trump. This idea that my individual freedom, and they talk about parental rights in education, religion, this idea of it being about some of these healthcare issues. And so that's why they wanted to get rid of the head of the health department in Ottawa County.
They
and they've
did
got
that as
litigation
well.
going on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they've got litigation going on because they kind of screwed that up.
But they're okay with my individual freedom usurps, I'll use that term, the individual freedom of someone who is immunocompromised and can't walk outside because they could get COVID and literally die. So we're
the risk to that person is significantly greater in terms of infringing their freedom, because the right to life, theoretically, should supersede your right to not have to wear a mask.
Exactly.
I wanted to tell
and collective, and we live in a community. You have to think of the greater good and not just yourself.
I kind of wanted to talk about this earlier. It was inherent to the hyper individualistic mind conception of freedom is a very attractive simplicity, right? You don't have to think about anything other than yourself. You don't have to see how you don't have to conceptualize on how the world might actually not be a good place and that you're part of the problem. You don't have to think about how your actions might affect other people, and if they do, well, tough shit, get over it, pull yourselves up by the bootstraps, right? It's a very it's an attractive way to, as you know, bad as it sounds, it's an attractive way to live your life, because you're free from accountability. You have no accountability for your actions. You're free to, be a belligerent jerk. You're free to be a belligerent jerk with impunity, and nothing will affect you.
Which is ironic to the conservative argument, because isn't their whole argument law and order, to have order? Though I say I replace order with control, because that's really what they want, not order. But that goes against that philosophy of conservatism, is that there are consequences for your actions, and we are a nation of laws.
It's a grift. It feels good to say.
Yeah. Again, more of that rhetoric.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And you know what's really ironic about all of this is cultures that prize being members of community, supporting one another, living in harmony, the different age groups, building community. Cultures that have community tend to be healthier and live longer. And here we are finding ourselves in a situation where people are saying, no, what really matters is me, the individual. And that's really all that matters here. And in the end, they are ultimately hurting themselves on that level as well. I mean, there's many layers to the hurt here, but that is one of them.
Yeah, that's just not a concept I could ever wrap my head around, because it's not the way that I think. I think the stronger the community, the better off we all are. So I can't subscribe to that mindset or even get myself to think in that way to even understand how they even believe what they believe.
Well, in the conversation I was having with, I don't know if I gave that person a name. We'll call her.
The second one you did not.
Yeah, we'll call her Karen. When I was speaking with Karen, one of the things that she really stressed that she wanted to make sure got out there was the idea that Ottawa Impact, Michigan Impact, they're trying to strengthen society by making sure that people who think differently, people who are ungodly, are not the ones giving the input in all of this. And one of the examples that Karen gave me that I just deeply prize, I deeply value this, she said that climate change and all that's going on with it is really just a matter of sin. And I was like, oh, sin, that's what's the problem here. And she said, yeah, if we'd all just quit sinning, we wouldn't have climate change. And I had nowhere to go with that because I can't deal with that mindset. No, it's not sin. We've got society,
it's action.
We've got things going on. Yeah.
The conservative line is indoctrination, right? And you listen to that and you can't help but see, this is hyperbolic and it's the favorite comparison of every leftist alive, but you listen to that and you replace ungodly with degenerate and you're in 1939. I mean, it's
the same rhetoric. It's just
the
changed
same
for
rhetoric.
the times.
It's reactionary populist rhetoric. But I can't really bring myself to genuinely feel any hatred towards this person, because you can tell how extensively indoctrinated they've been into their ideology, how they were raised on this, and how they genuinely deeply believe it to their core. And it's just the life that they must have life they must have had to have lived to think that way.
Yeah, but what it comes back to, I think, all of the research that I've been doing is we have a society that could really value all of the different voices and could make us stronger and move us forward. And we're choosing not to, in the name of the Constitution, which the point of the Constitution was, at least at its basis, and I'm not a constitutional attorney, so I will defer to you on this, Dan, but the point is, we wanted to be able to have a government where people had a say, that we wanted to be able to have some voices.
And that's why it was designed to be a living document and not a static document. But people who are traditionalists and far-right conservatives look at it as a static document and don't want it to change, because they're violating multiple amendments with what they're doing.
I would say even liberals as well.
Yeah, well, sure they do. Liberals are not perfect. The left is not perfect either, but no one is, exactly. But if you're subscribing to freedom and democracy, we have to, as we evolve as a country, our laws need to evolve with us. And I think diversity is a superpower. It is a strength. the more ideas and the more experiences we have behind anything, the better off we all are. And that's not my opinion. That is fact. That is evidence-based fact.
We were talking about Ottawa County changing their motto. I think you all might be familiar with the motto of the United States: out of many, one. You know, we celebrate diversity even in our own motto, and understanding that we are a nation of immigrants. We are a nation of mongrels in a sense, you know, a mixed breed that has come here and settled and created our own nation, our own culture. And we've got to have both the diversity and the unity, or we're going to just keep tearing ourselves apart, county by
We're
county,
going to die.
state by state.
We're going to die if we allow it to continue and to spread. We recently located back to Michigan from Texas, and it wasn't a hard decision given the climate in Texas right now. And so coming back to Michigan, and Michigan moving back toward progressive politics and progressive, like, just humanity. This is in the simplest form and term. And then learning that this is happening at the root level of counties and trying to spread throughout it is, I don't even know the term to use, honestly, but it's disheartening that, you made a point earlier, Dan, that how they did this was really brilliant. And I agree with that, because so many people weren't paying attention. There was so much apathy in politics really up until 2016. And that is the one thing I will give Donald Trump. That's one thing I will give him, is this country needed a wake-up call, and we got it. As hard as it's been, it was a wake-up call I really believe that we needed. But the minority has been given, and by minority I mean far-right conservatives, have been given they're the loudest voices. They've been given the biggest platform. And so they're the ones that are what we hear about every day. And issues like CRT and trans issues and religions and our modern day book burning are the things that we're focusing on, when there are so many deeper issues that are going on underneath the surface that are not being, COVID was one of them. COVID was one of them that wasn't paid attention to. We had 1.1 million Americans die from that. Plus, we have 2 to 6 million people at any given moment to this day who have long COVID, who are on disability, can't go to work. So there are severe consequences to this. We're really just starting to see the consequences of ignoring COVID at the level that we did, or that it was allowed, or that it was pushed, however you want to look at it, with long-term illnesses. There are reports of people getting dementia at young ages now already coming out with this. We don't even fully understand the consequences of COVID yet. And yet as a nation, we're pretending that it's over, and it isn't. It isn't over. It's still an active virus. It's still killing people. It's still disabling people. And yes, we've had 230 million vaccinations, fully vaccinated people in this country, and it's really what has slowed it down to the point to where we have it. It isn't. It's not disappearing because we're ignoring it, is my point.
Yeah. Again, whether it's ironic or not, what you're talking about in terms of COVID is really what inspired Joe Moss and others from Ottawa Impact to seek to take over the county government, because they were upset. They were upset with schools. And I think his children might have even gone to like a Christian school. But the governor was shutting it down because of issues. And so they were upset. And I saw it with a lot of schools, parents fighting mask mandates at school or quarantine, all those things. And they were upset. And we're giving schools advice, on the basis of, well, this is what the state law says. This is what the county health office is saying. You, as schools, have to follow that. You don't have the legal authority to ignore what the laws above you are saying you have to do. And so I think part of this whole idea of getting elected to be on the county, to control who the administrator is, who the lawyer is, who the county health department officials are, and then even this constitutional county piece is like, we don't think that these health mandates are constitutional because they infringe upon our freedom, whether it's First Amendment right to free assembly, or due process of law or other types of things, they want to have the ability to say, we're not going to follow that.
And then they're infringing on other people's rights. And then I think when I think like that, I think back to Taran's argument that it really is all about the socioeconomic balance that we have in this country and holding on to that power and that privilege, quite honestly. And it's what it is, it's privilege. And even when you're looking at COVID with mask mandates, it's privilege. I'm privileged enough to not have to wear a mask or feel like I don't need to wear a mask, but who cares if I get this person sick and they die type of thing, type of mentality.
That person and their family.
Yeah. But it's that type of mentality. It goes back to what the argument that Taran made, which I think is a beautiful point, and I think he's spot on. We have got to care about each other, and we've got to care about our communities, and we can't allow an ideology that does not care about anything but a few to spread throughout this country, throughout this state, and throughout this country.
We really have to strive to understand more, I think.
Well, we need to have more conversations, and I'd love to have more conversations with conservatives, but conservatives don't want to have conversations with me. But anyone is invited. I have an open invitation for this podcast, Love Where You Live, Live Love Local Michigan, to anyone who wants to come on here and actually have a conversation, a logical, educated conversation about conservative ideology in 2023. And why? Like, that is my sincere question. Why do you believe this? Is it because you've been told this is what you're supposed to believe? Why do you believe this? Why do you want to oppress people? Why do you want to ban books? Why do you not want diversity in your community? Why do you want everything to be ruled by religion and your religion only? That when you subscribe to freedom, when that is the opposite of freedom and democracy.
Well, that's where we go back to a mandate from God. You don't get much higher than that. And they believe the young lady that I've been speaking with believes in her heart of hearts that if she doesn't do this, God's going to do something to her. So she has got to toe the line because God's going to. Now, I tried to have a logical conversation there. We didn't get very far, but I think there are obviously different levels of belief, but in her case, I think she's very young and she truly believes that she's following God's mandate, and that makes it all the more scary.
From a biblical perspective, there are a couple of things I just want to touch upon in terms of the Christian nationalism. And the first is, both of them are going to be quotes from Jesus. The first is when he was on trial before his crucifixion, Pontius Pilate was asking him if he was the king of the Jews, understanding if he was going to have an uprising, essentially, if he crucified this man. Jesus's response was, "My kingdom is not of this world." And yet, many people who want to promote Christian nationalism seem to think that the United States of America is the new Israel, and that we must do whatever we can to bring God's kingdom here on earth in the United States as the chosen land, even though the person that is the namesake of their religion, Christ, said, "My kingdom is not of this world." The second goes back to when I think it was the Pharisees were trying to trap him about paying taxes. And I think this becomes very important for people who want to follow Christ to understand. They were asking Jesus whether it was appropriate to pay taxes, and he asked them for a coin. And he asked them whose image is on the coin, and they responded, Caesar. And so Jesus responds, render unto Caesar what is Caesar, and unto God what is God's. From my perspective, as a person who studied the Bible and Christ for a long time, this is very important because it shows that not only are we supposed to participate, in a sense, in government and understand a distinction between government, Caesar, and God. When he says, whose image is on that coin, Caesar, give that to Caesar. Going back to Genesis, God says, let us make man in our image. So if you grew up Christian, you're thinking of the Holy Trinity. understanding that we are in the image of God. And so it would be better to sacrifice yourself, your life, to follow Christ, to provide compassion, to feed the poor, the hungry, the fatherless, and the widow, and follow his example, rather than seeking to bring about a kingdom in this world.
Absolutely.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely. Politics is life, folks. And as you heard in this podcast, it all starts at the local level. There are stark consequences when only 30% of the population show up to vote in any election. When that happens, it makes it easy for a minority to hijack democracy. Unfortunately, we have a two-party system in this country, and one side of that two-party system actively and loudly works to prevent as many people as possible from voting. Why? Because it so happens that that party is also the party that benefits the most from lower voter turnout. I cannot stress this enough. Democracy is not a spectator sport. It demands active participation. Each voice, regardless if you're a homeless person or someone who lives in a multi-million-dollar mansion on one of our many lakes, each vote fuels the engine of change, transforming societies and shaping the future. Embrace your power. Raise your voice and let democracy resonate with the strength of millions of echoes. Vote at every election, from city government to county government to state government to federal government. Vote. Fortunately for Michigan, Governor Whitmer just signed into law 9 days of early voting. This is exactly how democracy should work. Every citizen should have ample opportunity to vote in every election, and their ability to vote should not be hindered. I'm going to put this out there right now. If you need help getting to the polls in Michigan, give us a call, and Live Love Local Michigan will make sure that you get there. Do you love our podcast and online content? Then you'll love our monthly print magazine plus 5 bonus magazines even more. Subscribe Plus 5 offers amazing adventures, stunning photography, and high-profile content you won't find in our free online magazine. Plus, you receive automatic entry into our monthly Spend Local Michigan and surprise pop-up giveaways, where you have a chance to win a monthly Made in Michigan goodie box and other awesome prizes like GoPros, kayaks, outdoor gear, and more. Subscribe Plus 5 today at livelovelocalmi.com.